Well, I'm back here to talk about a story. Particularly, we're talking about Gluware and how it solves the problem of internal development and how scripts and playbooks are just tomorrow's technical debt. Now, in 2001, around about that time, I spent many months, hundreds of hours of time learning and writing code. At that time, it was Perl to build a network monitoring system. I was working in a team, and I had a load of fun learning how to program and to get stuff done. But it was about 2 years later, I realized that I'd actually created a tremendous cross that I had to wear. I was on call all the time because the code would keep breaking, and Perl was not, perhaps the best language that we ever created, but it did do some pretty amazing things. It solved a lot of problems for customers, but it really didn't survive. And then when a few key people moved on, the whole project just stifled and struggled, and it was a real problem. And this is something that I want to address. I've seen so many people around me going off and saying Python and Ansible, and they keep trying to drive that square peg into a round hole. So, Michael, as part of prepping for talking about this story about how the idea that you're going to develop the code yourself is actually just technical debt. And you've got a customer story that you want to tell us about how they went down the path of Python and then went, oh, that's not working so well.
Yeah, absolutely. So just kind of jumping into it, I mean, I think the kind of the macro story, the big picture of it is many vendors haven't gotten network management software right. And so like 5+ years ago, I remember being at one of the major vendor conferences and saying, basically all network engineers have to become programmers. And I think it kind of sent a bit of shockwaves through the industry because I was one of those guys who spent a lot of time becoming an expert in CLI, becoming an expert in protocols. And now, I chose not to be a computer programmer. And now you're kind of telling me I have to learn and develop programming skill sets. And so I think when that sort of thing happened and, there were frameworks in the industry, like Ansible being one of them, one of the primary ones, that were having success in the DevOps world. And the mentality was like, well, if it can work in DevOps, we can adopt it and implement the same thing in the NetOps world. And like you said, science projects are fun. Yeah. Learning is fun. Testing is fun.
I think the thing that people missed here is that the idea is that engineers need to learn how to code, was that they need to learn how coding can help them. I think one of the things that got lost somewhere along the line is we raced off to get Python, and then we started adopting various frameworks. There was Ansible, there's SolveStack, there's Terraform, and they all solve real problems. But the challenge here is that once you're starting to do those, you're actually developing and maintaining that code. And then you need headcount. And there's one thing our employers are not doing is they're not increasing headcount, or they don't want to. They're very reluctant to increase headcount. And you were telling me this story about this large global consulting company. If we can get the slide up on the screen to sort of summarize that. And this was a story about how they went down the path of Python. And then they got some very quick wins up front, didn't they?
Yeah, when you go down that path, and if you just go down raw Python, it can be difficult. But if you go down the path with Ansible and playbooks, there are libraries of functions out there, and you can kind of consume these building blocks, these little task-based, automations, and you can start to stitch them together, and you can actually start to get things done. But ultimately, it is a bit of a slippery slope, or someone say it's the rabbit hole, is that you kind of keep stitching together and you go, it doesn't have a native component for that, so I'm going to go get a third-party module. Yeah. And now I want data modeling, so I'm going to bring in Jinja 2 templates. And then, you know what? This interface isn't that intelligent, so I'm going to layer in Napalm. And
now I want to bring in logging, but I can't store my logging in a SQL database because the performance is wrong. So then I start fiddling around with some other sort of unstructured database, and I build a data lake, and it's just a never-ending cycle, though, right? And this customer that we were talking about, they actually got to a critical point.
Yeah, they went down this path and they said, look, we're going to really reinvent the way we're doing networking. We're going to do SD-WAN, we're going to do automation orchestration, and we're going to do DevOps. So they went 2.5 years. They said they had some great failures and some great successes, and they taught a lot of people Python. But at the end of the day, they weren't really moving the needle on network automation. And the key breaking point is with this firm, they're global, over 700 sites. They have very limited times in which they can touch the network. It came down to maintenance windows, and they needed to be highly efficient to be able to get the work done within the maintenance windows. And the big kind of failure point of it was that when you look at the comprehension of the engineers on staff, kind of like you're saying, the staffing issue, is that maybe only 1 in 10 or even lower than that really have the capacity or the interest to go and become scripters and programmers. So, you're not getting a lot of uptake in it. And then basically the one who wrote it has got to run it, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So then it's not really democratized. You're not creating something that everyone can use. And so,
well, I call that 5 o'clock technology, because that's what happened to me is I wasn't able to go home at 5 o'clock, right? I had to stay and fix it until it worked, or I had to be there to babysit it, or I had to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning to work out why the script wasn't running or something like that. It was a horrible thing.
Exactly. And so, an organization has to make a decision. Do you want to build a software team within your company with architects and development and test and maintain? Because just like you said, it is the new technical debt. When you have scripts and things that people wrote, and the problems with scripts or even within a playbook, you're building in logic. You're making design decisions.
Yeah.
And the way you make a decision is not going to be the same decision someone else is going to do. So when you try to, let's say that engineer is going to move on or someone leaves the company, when you try to take something someone's written and scripted or, built out complex playbooks, with nested tasks and stuff, you try to hand that to someone else to understand the logic. And this is the dirty secret of it, which is when a script goes bad, right? It goes bad.
Well, the trouble with these scripts is that I've got to test them. I've got to validate them. And I always, when I was doing this and when Python and Ansible, people tell me that they have to go and have a lab and they have to test it and validate it. And they spend days or weeks just doing that stuff. And they're not even confident. I think the answer here is to sort of say that it's not that Python and Ansible is bad, but there's parts of it that you just shouldn't be doing. And you should be buying something from someone who can do that part for you. It's like saying I can make my own Coca-Cola.
Right.
But really, it's a lot easier to just go and buy a can of Coke, right? Because
exactly. It's like, when is it worth it to do the heavy lifting, or when is it worth it to buy and then just customize on top? And we just heard from a customer where they understand it's like that value add of just building on top. And when this customer use case we're talking about, they're 2.5 years into it. They had outage, they had issues still, and they started saying, we need something more intelligent. They were in the rare situation where the management had vision and kind of pulled the plug on it, said, we're not meeting our goals. We're not reaching what we achieved. We need something more intelligent. And we kind of need the low code, no code. We need to capitalize on our engineers' CLI skill set. And
they decided on Gluware for 700 sites in that time frame. I mean, you were able to convince them that you could do it.
Yeah, it's more complicated than that. And that, this particular customer came with us at over 75 use cases and said, you guys need to do all this. And then we got judged on every single use case. But we proved that we could do it. Then we rolled out and again, this is during the pandemic. We rolled out at 1,000 devices and then had eight high priority use cases. We had success. Then we rolled to a global rollout. And within 16 weeks, we had over 14,000 network devices being automated.
And how many
Gluware.
weeks? 14 weeks.
It was something around 16 weeks. And again, when you think about automation, a lot of the delays are not in the technology. There's just functional administrative delays. But the big takeaway is that this senior leadership, and we have limitations on using their name, but they actually spoke at Onug Spring on our behalf. And he said, I can tell you, we're not going to put a number on it, but the ROI is in the millions, and that we have an efficiency of a 50-to-1 type of ratio. So when you think about the efficiency you can gain and getting to an ROI and using automation, all of a sudden it does kind of begin to be a game changer where automation can really move the bar for your organization.
So the last thing here is Python and Ansible is still useful because I can still use Gluware as a framework, if you like. That's very simple. So what you use Ansible for, you can still use Gluware for to drive your network. And
absolutely. It has our strengths. And I think the value add is in the integrations. When you're using scripting and or coding and you're doing an integration or an API integration, you got to wrap some logic around it. You got to wrap some guardrails and stuff. And I think this is where, if you have engineers with that skill set, that's where the value is.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time for this, but the thing I wanted to draw out from this discussion is there's a right place for Python and Ansible and writing your own code. And one way to do that is to write it directly to the network device. But at some point, you'll hit a scaling problem. And you might want to start thinking about putting a tool like Gluware in the chain and then doing your Python and Ansible on top of that so that you're actually doing a lot less work and you're spending a lot more time at home and you get paid the same whether you do or you don't, right? So this should actually increase your lifespan and your generalized happiness. And if you want to know more information, get in contact with Gluware. They can tell you more about this actual story. It's a lot more going on in the background, I assure you, than I can tell you here. Okay, so stay tuned for our next segment, which is coming up in about 10 segments. We're going to be talking with Acuity, Chris DePaola, who's actually using Gluware to automate his EVP and VXLAN data with CI/CD. He's actually got a whole CI/CD pipeline using Gluware in that chain. It's coming right up.